Hey guys, Nefertiti here. On my recent poll I asked you guys what would you like to see next from me in tutorials, and almost all of you voted for my gauntlets. If you want to learn how to make these, it's actually a lot simpler than you think. The biggest thing is it's going to require a lot of patience, some designing beforehand, and of course an artistic flair. You can make your own however you want, design them special, whatever it takes. It's a little bit costly, but you can cut corners in some places, and I'll tell you all about it when we go over materials. So if you are interested in finding out how to make something like this, simply stay tuned and I will show you how to do it. Okie dokie. So the very first thing that we're going to have to go over is a couple of the materials you're going to need. The first and easiest is a piece of poster board. You can find them at dollar stores or at Walmart. They only sell for about 50 cents, but these make the templates. And then you're going to need the bulk of the project, which is 2 different kinds of craft foam. Now, the difference here is that this one is 3 millimeters thick, so it's really stable, it's great for structure, and it picks up details really good without compromising the structure of it. So that one works really good for making a bunch of details without it falling apart. And then we have this one, which is about 1 millimeter. I believe I got this at Walmart. The other one you have to usually get from a hobby store. They're about the only places that you can find the different kinds. But the 1 millimeter is really good for details. So if we put these aside for just a moment, I'll go over with the next few materials that you're going to need. So aside from the obvious, scissors, pens, pencils, Sharpies, all that good stuff, you are going to need one of these. This is a fabric ruler, and you can find it at Walmart for $1. This is what we're going to use to measure the length of your arm to get an accurate measurement. You're also going to need the measurements for your gauntlet. Now, this is going to differ from mine because I'm making mine for a customer here, so I have their precise measurements that I asked them to get beforehand. When you go to measure yours, this is where the fabric ruler comes in. So let me just set this aside for a moment, please. Alright, and you're also going to need this, which is reference of whatever you're making. Now, you don't have to be an artist to be able to design something like this, but it is a good rule of thumb to have at least some design to base it off of, so that you have your reference there and you're ready to work with it. I designed mine beforehand, but you can do it however you like. It will measure the length of my arm. Okay, so in order to begin, we have to measure the length of the arm, and then you have to measure your circumference right around where your elbow is. This is going to be the thickest part of your arm. So just wrap your ruler around it like this. This is where fabric rulers are awesome. And take a note of how many inches it is. It may be more than you expect, so don't be surprised. And then be sure to mark down whatever your measurement was and put it down on your paper here. So we're just going to mark the total length right here. Usually I like to leave a little bit of underside, so I'm going to take off about 1/2 inch or so for the laces and make a little mark right there. This makes a nice snug fit. Alright, and the reason why we mark only half of it like this is because we are going to duplicate this pattern and do 2 halves. So next let's do your wrist. Same method as before, just measure the width of your wrist by wrapping it around. I have very tiny wrists, so if you are making these for someone, be sure that you have their measurements first. Okay, so we're going to go up to the top where we mark down our full length, which for this customer was 11 inches. Now for your wrist, you do not want it to wrap completely around, so with this one, cut it in half. When you cut it in half like this, it will make it fit nice and snug between the forearm and your wrist. So we're going to put that aside for a moment so that we can begin sketching our design. And make sure that you do reference as you're doing this. Just try to remember that as you draw, you're doing half of your project. And just go to your structure lines and draw the shape that you've designed. This one was nice and simplistic. Just a simple diamond shape on the top. I just have to trace between my 2 lines, giving it just a little slight curve, and then when you reach your secondary point, you want to draw towards the back side of the paper. Now you see how it doesn't go to the point here at the end? There's a simple way to fix that. All we have to do is come to the corner of the paper and then draw between the paper and go all the way up to our other point. Like that. Now compare it to your drawing and see if you like it. Be sure you make notes that that's not the lines you want if you do not wish to have it like that. It's also a good idea that when you're measuring, especially with details like this, the bend in your arm has to be able to move freely with armor like this. So your armor has to have enough room that it's not going to intersect with your joint. So as you can see here, I do need to move this point a little further up so that the arm is able to still bend. And then simply just angle it back to your corner and leave a note that that is not the piece you want when you go to make your cuts. So now that I have this, I always go over it with a color Sharpie so I know exactly which lines I have and which ones are going to be the primary pieces, just so I don't get mixed up or anything like that. So we're just going to draw these edges like that. And now comes the fun part. We're going to do the little scroll work designs, or in your case, however you've designed it, if you have details on your gauntlet, this is the time that you're going to put them on. Be sure you compare it to the length of the arm before you begin, and it all matches up the way you want it to, and then compare it to your drawing so you know how to draw. Now, whenever I do this, the design that I've created wraps all the way around the arm as sort of like a decorative border. It also gives it more three-dimensional shape here. So I'm going to start by doing my little intricate swirls that I designed. Wrap them around. Try to be as clean as you can when you work on them. It just makes the whole thing fit nicer. Everything just slides into place. And then if you plan on doing multiple layers instead of just one flat layer, be sure to mark the paper in a way that it reminds you that this is going to be a different depth from the rest of it. Normally if something is higher, I like to cross hatch it, and then do the same thing as you work on the borders. If you look at my design, you can see that there is another central piece here with a nice blue gemstone in the middle. I just have to work my way up the design, imagining it cut in half as I work. This is going to make it so that it is perfectly symmetrical on both sides. So just draw a half shape. Everything is halved because you're just going to flip it over and it's all going to be fixed. I'm also making my notes that this edge is going to be raised, following my pattern. Go up to the point, and then just shade it all in so I know this is a raised edge. If you have very complex designs, you'll find that this is a lifesaver when you're working on it later on. Finish off the edge of my border, and of course shade the rest in. Okay, and now there are a couple smaller details here, like these little swirls. And for stuff like this, I want it to be a different depth, and I want it to be separated. So I'm marking it with little dots so that I know that these are going to be different pieces. I don't want them to be super thick like the rest of it. I want them to be nice and thin, just little minute details. And the same thing with the little one up here. So with that done, I now have one half of my gauntlet entirely done. The only thing that's left to do now is to cut it out. Alrighty. So with that half done, we're going to put it aside and we have to work on the second piece, which is going to allow your wrist to bend. So take your ruler and measure how wide it is from the two sides of your wrist, only on the top side. This piece does not need to wrap all the way around. Make it on your paper and be sure you take your measurements, mark it down. And with this one, we're not going to do the half technique. We're just going to freehand the whole thing so that it does match up. Make sure you look at your design and see how far onto your hand it's supposed to go and how wide the edges would need to be in order to intersect with it. Do not make it go any further than your thumb, or you're going to have trouble moving the gauntlet later on. You do want to make sure that that thumb has full movement, so move the ruler back a bit if you need to get that accurate measurement and allow it to move. And then come up here. I'm going to measure the length as well, just so I know how far I can go, because on my design you can see that there is a piece on it that is going to come forward a little bit, but I don't want it to come too far forward that it ends up interfering with my ability to bend my wrist. So I've got the measurements there for the wrist. Now I just have to draw that little center piece that's going to fold over. This piece is going to be really small, and it's somewhat hard to describe. It's kind of like a cover piece specifically designed for your joint. I've seen some people that they avoid it by using a wrist wrap or something. I like to make them like this just so that I know how wide I have to go for my hand. And it covers up everything. It keeps that armor flow. It just makes everything look great. Alright, so here we've got the design going on. If you eyeball it and it looks almost completely symmetrical, just keep working at it as you flesh out the design. We can make it completely symmetrical in a minute here, and I will show you how. So once we have this, we're just going to go ahead and cut it out. Now once it's free from the paper, this is where the symmetrical part comes in. You're going to take your design and fold it in half, aiming more towards the side that you like how it looks a bit better. And once it's folded over and everything like this, you're going to cut along the good edge that you like, which will in turn make the entire thing completely symmetrical on both sides. So do make sure that if you're doing it like this, you leave a little bit of space to cut and make it symmetrical. Unfold it and ta-da! Perfect. Be sure to hold it up to your wrist and see how it looks. If you need to make it bigger, do so, smaller, etc. You can see here that it allows my wrist to move freely, which is exactly what this piece is supposed to do. And this one does have a couple little designs on it, so I'm going to go ahead and draw them in right now. Again, if yours has designs, be sure to put them in. If not, this is entirely optional. You don't have to go with this much intricacy and design like I do. I tend to go above and beyond when it comes to working on stuff like this, which is... I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but either way, it ends up making a lot of work, but the effort and the detail shows. And there's also a little gemstone in this one, so I do have to make a mark for that little stone. Okay, and then I'm going to color this in so I know that it is a raised edge. Trying to keep everything matching like that is a big help, especially if you're doing multiple gauntlets or you're doing something with a lot of little intricate pieces. It just helps to remind yourself as well as kind of make your template look cool. That little piece in the middle I'm not going to touch because I know I have to cut it out. Okay, so with that all done, now we have to do the hard part, which is measuring the top of the hand. I have a template that I made for this exact reason, and it took a long time to do. Unfortunately, this is also one of the key pieces that makes this functional, so there's not too much I can actually show you guys as far as how it works, but I am gonna show you the piece that I made, and hopefully you can somewhat understand how it works. I'm sorry, I wish I could be a bit more helpful in this aspect, but this is one of the primary pieces that makes my gauntlets work, so it is something that I don't really want to share exactly how it was done, and there's been quite a few drafts in order to make this one work as well as it does. So try to base it off of this design in order to help make your own. A lot of it is measuring the width of your hand, giving your fingers space in between each one to bend, and the thumb has to be given a lot of girth when it comes to building it. The very next thing that we're going to have to do is the fingers, which the fingers are going to be in 3 segments each. They are going to vary, so you do need to take measurements of how long your finger is, and then that piece is going to be divided by thirds. It's kind of odd when you measure it. Most times your measurements are going to come up a little bit odd, especially if you're like me and your fingers are all different measurements. This is why I had my customer take measurements for this exact reason. And this will let you know the length of them. So here I'm looking at the measurements that they have. It's about 3 inches for the thumb. So I'm just going to make a mark at 3 inches from the bottom of my paper to know that that is the maximum length of these. Now the key factor to making this work is that your joints have to be able to bend. So here at the wrist, from the web of your hand to the bottom of your thumb where your palm starts, you do want to measure how wide that is. Take that measurement and have it be the biggest width. Now, when you go to actually draw how these are going to work, your fist has to be able to close completely, so there has to be little anchor points for you to stitch each finger together with. So that's what I always start with, are the 2 anchors. They're kind of like little tags that'll stick out from the actual design, and they give the rivets, in this case, something to grab onto so that they can move and rotate as you bend your wrist. You could go for one solid piece, but with foam, it doesn't quite work as well. And then you just slowly sketch your design out. The first portion that you're doing is going to be between your thumb and the web of your hand for the thickness. But when you go to measure the tip of your thumb like this, in order for the claw to work, there is a special little thing that you have to do with it so that you can insert your claw properly, which is to bring these edges up, and then the second set of tags so that you can attach the next piece and bring it in. Now, the first 2 pieces are going to have a pointed tip like this so that they create a nice smooth transition. Unfortunately, it's hard to describe, but I can somewhat show you what I mean. Alright, so I went ahead and grabbed the pieces that I've made beforehand. These ones I use for all my gauntlets because of the designs that I tested and they worked. Your pointer and middle finger excuse me, will be the same set. The thumb will have its own set of measurements. And then the last ones are much smaller, and those are going to be for your pinky and your ring finger. It's a good idea to look at the tips of your fingers and see how long they all are, especially when your palm is spread, as this will help you understand how it goes. So if you can look at these, you see that this one right here, compared to the others, they are all slightly different in size. It's really, really hard to describe to you. The primary piece that's going to attach to your thumb, it has these little tags on the sides, which you're going to rivet to the hand piece that you made so that it allows your thumb to bend. And the other 2 tags that are pointed at the sides should come far down enough that they allow your thumb to bend. So make sure that they stretch all the way to that exact point there. The second piece is going to always layer on top of it, and the tags on this one are going to interlock with the tags on the end here. What I mean by this is confusing. These two tags will intersect so that when it's on your thumb and it bends, they allow it to pivot because it can bend and flex right at that joint. And then the weird piece is the very tip of the finger, which, as you can clearly see, looks different. The tags are arranged differently and it has a rounded edge. Same as before, the tags on the front are going to connect to the last ones. The rounded piece on the end is for the claw. The little tags there are so that you can either rivet or sew the claw itself on. And when it is on your hand like this, there's going to be a little bit of overhang, and that's to help cover up the edge of the claw and make it look a little bit more seamless as you're working. I'm sorry, this is falling apart. It will allow your hands to bend so that you can make fists, you can use each individual finger. You get a lot of dexterity with them, although you do lose a little bit of mobility. I can't really do a good job of explaining how to do this, as it's taken me a really long time to measure out the hand and the fingers and everything. You'll have to try and true and see what you can do for yourself. Another piece of this gauntlet that's key to the design is that the customer requested it have sort of a wing on the side of it. So I do have to make the little spikes that come off the end in order to hold the membranes up. It's a good idea to try making pieces like this on a flat edge so that you can compare it directly to the side of your arm. And also remember how wide your gauntlet is if you're doing multiples of these, so that you know how long you can go with it. You could use your forearm. That's personally what I prefer to do, but some people insist on using the gauntlet so that they have straight edges. So I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to sketch the first one. Actually, I'm going to move it up a little bit here. I try to not waste as much paper as I can, but when it comes to something like this, I do want to make sure that it has the right length. So I'm just roughly sketching these little fins. Just like that. Come around. And compare them to the size in your reference so that they do match up accordingly for how big they're supposed to be. The membrane inside you don't make out of a paper template just yet, because 9 times out of 10 the membrane is going to be made out of something else, normally a type of stretchable fabric, or if you're feeling real fancy you can even go liquid latex. But for me, I have a plan for that, which I will show you guys later. So with the little spikes all sketched out here, I'm just going to outline them so that they're nice and clear. This also allows me to define the shape a little bit more and pardon me, and make it so that it's the right thickness all the way around. And then of course, as always, you're just gonna cut out your shapes. Alrighty, so with these pieces all cut out now, be sure to hold them up against your arm and make sure that they're the length that you want, because you can always angle them on the gauntlet later and make sure that they fit properly. Looking at these, they do fit the way I want them to, and the way that I'm going to attach them, they should be able to oscillate out so that the fin can be spread and look like it's mid-flight, or they can sit closed up against it. So I'm going to take these and put them aside in order to work on the next piece of the gauntlet. We now have officially all the template pieces cut out, so we're ready to move on. Alrighty, so now that all the templates cut out, we have to start working with the foam. So we're going to start with the 3mm, since that's the thickest foam and it's going to be the strongest to use on the forearm. We're going to go ahead and grab the template, and this is where that half piece that we designed comes in perfectly. So what you're going to do is you're going to take half of it and a nice pen tip. It can also be a toothpick or, you know, anything that's going to leave a nice deep impression. When you go to put your template on, make sure it's flipped the other way first and line it up with your edges. so that you can see if it will fit when you take it and flip it over here. It should be just enough foam in order to fit it. So I'm going to stick it up here in the edges to conserve as much foam as I possibly can. And then I'm going to trace the outline of the design. Only along the outside edge. That one flat edge that is the halfway point, you do not want to leave any sort of impression in the foam from. Because now you're going to flip it over and duplicate the design. Just carefully flipping it over here to make sure. Line up the edges so that they do sit where they're supposed to and that both edges intersect, making the two halves a complete whole. This will make it totally symmetrical. And then just trace this other edge. Along we go, just like this. Alright, perfect. So now with that piece done, you can see that I do have the entire shape traced out on my foam. We do have to still do any designs that are on it, and for this piece I'm going to take and put it aside for just a moment. With the other hand pieces, you don't want them to be this 3mm because it'll be too thick for your arm to bend. So just sit with the 3mm for the primary wrist piece. The 1mm will be the rest. And then just cut out this piece here like that. Okay, and then as soon as you finish cutting it out, now it comes time to do all the designs. You can always hold it up to your arm and see how it looks. Make sure that the pieces line up the way you want them to. Doesn't that look so cool already? It fits the entirety of the forearm. And it looks exactly like the design that I was aiming for with it, which is awesome. Hopefully yours turns out too. I'd love to see the pictures of what you guys are working on. Feel free to leave a comment below and show me what you're working on. I would love to see how your projects are coming along should you choose to do this. I may even feature them on my next video if I'm sorry, I got tongue-tied. I may feature them on my next video if I like them. The next portion of the work that I have to do is I need to cut out all of the little intricate detail pieces from this template so that I can trace them onto this foam for the elegant details. Take your time with this piece and make sure that as you work on it, you capture all the little details. You don't want to cut too deep, you just want to cut nice and smooth around the edges. Don't damage the overall template because you're going to probably use it again if you're doing two pieces like I am. So I'm just working on cutting out all of my little individual pieces here. And once those pieces are cut out, now it's time to put this design onto the gauntlet. So I'm going to take my first edge piece and lay it on here. Make sure that it's all nice and lined up with the edges. And then just come in with any sharp tool. Pens work the best, even dead pens, that's why I tend to keep some. And just press real hard along the edges so that you trace this design onto the foam. If you're worried about it moving around, you can always use tape to stick it on there and hold it in place. I prefer just to freehand mine. You can see that I did skip that straight edge right there, and that's because we are flipping this design. So if you're doing a design like this and you've got the half piece on there, don't trace the direct edge. You do want that to stay as it is. You don't want to leave an impression on it because the two sides are going to come together and make one uniform piece. And again, once the entirety of it is traced on there, you can see the impression that the pen left. It's very, very slight, which is exactly what I'm going for. Take the template, flip it over, and just duplicate the steps on the next side. Just going to continue tracing along the design here, duplicating it for the other side of the foam. And as soon as that's done, the centerpiece right here is where there's going to be a lit LED gemstone. So I'm actually going to be cutting this piece out by just gently poking my scissors through the foam and then carefully cutting along the edges. It's a good idea to try and do this as smoothly as you can. You can use an X-Acto knife if you trust yourself, or a carpentry blade also works pretty good. It all depends on your level of comfortability. I'm just going to continue to use my scissors since I do have a little bit more control with them, and I have too many scars on my other hand from X-Acto blades. Just carefully cutting along the edge, trying to keep it as smooth as I can. And there we go. I'm going to save this piece so that I can cut out the exact size of the crystal later. Okay, see that? Doesn't that look so pretty? Now that I've got that piece all nice and traced out there, there are a couple more pieces that I do need to do for this, and one of which is going to be the textured sides here. But before I do the textured sides, I have to trace the template pieces of the little swirl right here onto the foam, since that is a good portion of this raised edge. You can see where I have the crosshatch markings on there. That indicates that this is supposed to be the same level as the rest of the template that I traced out with my foam. So I'm just going to trace along the edges here, making sure that I'm pressing hard enough with the pen that it does leave a slight impression in the foam. Go around the edge like this. If your designs are very complicated or you have a lot of little details like this, it's a good idea to tape them down so that you do know what goes where and all that. And especially with symmetrical stuff, try to line it up as clearly as you can. You don't want one piece to stick out more than the other or be cockeyed, and it interferes with the whole design and makes the whole aesthetics of everything look less appealing. And don't be afraid to take your time with this. There we go. Okay, so now that I have these two pieces done, I can put this aside. These are all of the pieces from this layer. These two little swirls I want to be on a different layer by themselves so that they're raised up a bit, and I'm going to use the 1mm foam in which to do this. So I'm going to take them here, lay it down, and again, this is one of those, you try to conserve the foam when you do two pieces of each. Since I only made 1/2, I do have to duplicate these. Just going to trace along the edges here. If you're using the 1mm foam, you'll notice two things. One, it picks up really easily just small scratches and markings like that. So try to be really, really careful when you're tracing the outside of your template. You don't want to end up with a scratch across one side of it that's not supposed to be there. Put this piece aside. And then I'm going to do the big one. Trying to conserve as much foam as possible. So I'm just going to layer this how I can. Just like that. Line it up with the flat edge. And just trace along the edges. I like using poster board for the templates since it is a bit stronger than everything else, and it holds up much better than, say, wax paper or just paper. I've seen a lot of people just use paper or masking tape. Now, when you do these designs, make sure that you flip the template over to do the other side so that you do have two exact duplicates on either side. That way, when you mirror them by putting them on the foam, they line up just perfectly. Edge, and there we go. So now with those done and traced out, the last thing I have to do is I need to cut them out, which is going to take a minute, so I'm going to do that and I will see you guys as soon as I'm done with it. Alrighty, so I finished cutting out all those little pieces. And I'm going to lay them on my foam here so that I can see how it looks, just to make sure that they all line up the way I want them to. It's always a good idea to do this, just to make sure if you have any little details that you need to fix, or maybe something that you want to move, or you want to change the shape a little bit. So looking at it, I can see that it looks exactly the way I want. It's lying the way it should. Everything looks like it's going to fit perfectly. I'm going to take all these pieces and just put them to the side for now. And now I'm going to cut out the hand. When it comes to the wrist and the hand pieces, you do want to cut them out of the 1mm foam, as it will allow you to have a bit more flexibility compared to the 3mm. When you're using these templates, do make sure that you're cutting out the right sides. With some of the foam, you'll notice that one side may be slightly shiny compared to the other one. I've noticed this with a couple different brands. I think Foamies is about the only one that it's universal on both sides of the foam. Just for my personal reference, it makes it easier if I can see my pen marks on one side compared to another. It just seems to give it a bit more of a softened edge. So I'm going to trace along this template here. Put my hand on that. Right, I can put that template aside once it's there. The only thing is, I have pre-marked holes for this template, where it's going to line up with the two corners here for the hand piece. So I'm just going to check the spot where they are and make a little mark with my pen so I know where it is on the foam. And then there's a second one over here. I'm just going to make a little mark for that. This is just so I know where to drill the holes for the rivets later on when I go to attach these two pieces to each other. I'll explain it much more in depth when I get to it. Now I just have to trace the design, which in the case of this one, it's just a simple border on the edges. I'm having trouble with my phone. There we go. So I'm looking at the reference of my hand. There's no lines that go up it like I've done with some of my other gauntlets. There's no swirls, there's no markings. It's just a simple border, and this is because there are going to be some pretty storm-colored feathers that are going to come off the top of the wrist here and are going to cover a good portion of the hand. So there's no point in texturing the foam too much if it's just going to get covered up in the end. So all I have to do is just trace all along the edges of my foam so that I leave a nice impression for me to work with. And now I'm going to trace off the wrist piece. Try to conserve as much foam as you can by lining up your pieces in a way that they get as close to each other as they can while still leaving enough room for the scissors to come through and cut. So I'm going to trace the edges of my design like this. Come all along the sides. Alright, and since this one does have markings, I have to make a nice little cut up here in the middle in order to cut out the two different sides. It's just going to cut along the edges here, make sure that I get into all the little crevices, and you can see that I've only cut out half the design, which is perfect because since this thing is symmetrical, I can just flip it over and mirror the design so that it is in fact perfectly symmetrical. So I'm just going to come along here and trace the edges, making sure I'm pressing hard enough to leave an impression. Get to the edge and then just flip it over. I do have to make a small little indentation here because this piece is going to have another little lit gemstone. So I just have to leave a little bit of a marking on there so I know to cut it out. And then of course duplicate the other side. I'm going to come along down here and then finish it off just like that. And the other half of my circle, of course, for the gemstone to be cut out. Okay. With that done, I now have both of those pieces completely ready, so I can go ahead and cut them out using my scissors. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and as soon as it is done, I shall see you guys in just a minute. Alrighty, so I just finished cutting out the rest of this piece as well as the top of the hand, so now it's time to do these two little spines. I want them to be a bit more structurally stable, especially since they're probably going to oscillate. So I'm going to use the 3mm for this. When placing these little fins on here, take this tag off, I want to have ample room for them. So I'm going to do them along the side edge here and press as hard as I can to leave an imprint on the foam so that it does make a clear edge. When it comes to using this 3mm, I try to be as conservative as I can with it since it does run a bit more pricey than the regular 1mm foam. You can usually get a pack of about, say, 20 or so for like 10 bucks at Walmart. But with these, you have to purchase them at a hobby store, and I've seen them go as high as $3 per sheet of foam, which is absolutely ridiculous for a piece of foam. So definitely don't waste it. Use as much of it as you can in such a tiny little area, and it will help to save it and stretch your dollar in the end, especially if you tend on making more than one gauntlet. So now that I have those two pieces there, I'm going to go ahead and cut them out. It's just going to take a minute here. And there we go. I've got both pieces totally cut out and trimmed so that they do look the way I want them to. I'm going to put them aside with the other pieces of foam. And now it comes time to do the fingers. We're going to go back to the 1mm foam for the fingers. And when you go to cut these pieces out, remember that they are labeled. Or if when you were making them you labeled them, I usually mark mine with little increments so that I know which fingers they go to and which ones are which. So we've got the 3, the 2, and the 1. And since this will be used for the ring finger and the pinky, you're going to make sure that you get 2 of each of them. So I'm going to go ahead and trace these on here. And as I'm tracing each one of these sets here, I am going to cut them out and lay them on their adjoining pieces so that I know which ones are which. Pausing between each one, it does get a bit tedious, but in the end it all stacks up. You just got to make sure that you cut out all the pieces individually, layer them together so that you know which ones are which. Okay guys, I am so sorry about the abrupt end to this video, the way it just cuts off like that. I am not sure what exactly happened, but the recording that I had after this point got completely corrupted and the video file was all inverted and messed up and the camera wasn't focused and it just looks absolutely horrendous, so I'm not going to subject you guys to sitting there and watching that as I continue cutting out pieces of foam. This video is pretty long already, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it here, and I will upload the next portion when I have time. If you did enjoy the video and you felt it taught you something that you didn't know, or you were just interested by it, be sure to leave a like. I enjoy seeing that you guys like watching my content. And if you do like what I'm making and the things that I do, be sure to subscribe. I would love to see more subscribers on my list. Leave comments and suggestions for things you'd like me to do, or if you're maybe curious about how to make something, I'd be more than happy to share what knowledge I have to help you better yourselves. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful day and a beautiful life.